Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on what time of the day you're watching this. This is episode 5 of the Grumpy Old Vet. Got a few things to kind of go through today. This might not be a real long one, but it might. I don't know. I don't write a script before I do these. So these come just right off the top of my head. Some of the issues that are going on in Hillsdale right now. Um, yeah, I brought out in episode 4 uh, what was going on with in Marney Kast's office, how she set up the precinct delegate election of 2022, um, how there's evidence to prove that she colluded and conspired to do that as far back as April, what they were doing. Well, there's something a little bit more that goes on there in her office. Now, Marnie's the clerk of the courts. When If you have to file any paperwork in circuit court, you have to take it to the county clerk's office and file it there. I've got a little organization called the Hillsdale Justice Project. We've it, we started it some around 2012. We bought a building back in let's see, it was 2000 December 2018. Um, December 2018, January 2019, I guess, is when we got into the building. And we're a 501c3, which means we're not supposed to be paying taxes. Of course, the city has been charging us taxes the whole time we were in there, denied our tax exempt status, and of course, nobody could explain why, other than my last name. So we'd been fighting that whole time. And while we were fighting all that and going through that whole thing, and I might bring up some of this on the next discussion, show where after 3 years of being charged taxes and all the things that we've done, all the legal expenses that we've had to try to go through to try to get that all taken care of, and then finally we split our building and sold one half and took care of all the illegal taxes that they're taxing us on. And of course, after we did all that, we're getting still harassing letters from the Treasurer's Department saying that we owe taxes when we don't. We've got it all paid for. And then, of course, we got the tax exempt status, something we should have had back in 2019. And so maybe that's a discussion for another time. But this kind of ties into that as we were going through that. Um, one Sunday morning in December, somebody had shattered our main window out. And somebody that was jogging down the street happened to see that the window was shattered out and contacted one of the police officers that was getting in his car there. Of course, you can see my window from City Hall. You can see my window from where the police come out and get in their cars. And so they come up and investigated. So I boarded the window up because typically right there next to the police department, there's very few incidences of vandalism ever. But oddly, my window got shattered. The Hillsdale Justice Project window got shattered, and you can tell it was done with a hammer. You can see where the hammer strike was. You can see the hammer head strike. So anyway, we cleaned that all up that Sunday morning and got it all boarded up. And we didn't want to put another window in there and have that happen. Besides the way we used the classroom there, with that window there, we got a lot of traffic noise from 99 as the big trucks roll through there, and that's a little bit distracting to class when we show videos and do lectures. And so we boarded it up and put foam there, and it was good. We had it painted. Well, the city decided then that I couldn't have it like that, and so they wrote us a ticket, told us we had to have that window taken care of. So I felt like we were being kind of targeted yet again, and I own a company called Rutan Management Incorporated. One of the things that we do is we do building analysis. We do energy audits. We do mold and testing and lead and asbestos testing. And one of our one of the major things we do is we do building inspections, and we do building inspections for code and safety and all of those things. And so they were claiming that I violated a code, in which that code said that I had to have 75% glazing on the front of the building, and so I couldn't have that. I had to put that window back in. Well, that was going to be a $1,300 window. We just didn't have the $1,300 right then. We're a very small and very poor organization. I mean, we don't have a lot of money. And so I kind of fought him on that and took it to court. And before we went to court, I noticed that there's a lot of other buildings in Hillsdale that had exactly the same code violation. Two of them were county buildings and two of them were city buildings. And so I proceeded to do 22 inspections from the public venue, from the sidewalk. And I put those 22 inspections together as proof that we were being targeted and that this was basically harassment. And went before district court. And of course, when I filed my motion with district court, Tom Thompson, the city lawyer, had all of my stuff thrown out, 78 pages thrown out. So basically, we went before the judge, and judge knew then that at that point in time, what they were arguing was the international zoning code. I think it was 36 point. Anyway, I can't remember right now. The zoning code that said I had to have 75% glazing on the front of my building, that the city was going to lose that because I could prove that with my building I had 81.2% glazing on my building, and the building right next to me only had 24% glazing on the front of the building. So this international zoning code that they were charging me with, they were going to lose. And so when their lawyer had all of my proofs and everything thrown out of court, they decided to change their argument. So we get into court and they change their argument and they argue a general code. And I tried to bring the court back to, excuse me, that's not what they charged me with. They were charging me with the international zoning code that said I didn't have 75% glazing. Their side objected. The judge, Megan Stuyvesant, sustained that and would not let me speak of the international zoning code that dealt with the 75% glazing. So she let them change their argument completely different of what they charged me and found me guilty. All right, gave me 60 days to change out the window. So we changed out the window. Well, that 70 some page document that I had filed with the court that Thompson had thrown out involved 22 inspections. I inspected 22 buildings in Hillsdale. One of them happened to be Megan Stuyvesant's courthouse, and which that is a county building. And there was problems with that building. It violated code, the same code they were going after me for. Isn't that ironic that I was found guilty in a court building that had the same violation that I was being charged with? So those 22 inspections, they knew then that they weren't going to be able to win that case. So the judge allowed them to change their argument midstream, charge me with something else, find me guilty, forced me to put the window in. But those 22 building inspections that I did got handed over to the city code enforcement. Now, those 22 inspections, I was not doing as a complaint against any of those buildings. I did it as proof that I was being targeted, that I was being singled out when there was 22 other buildings, some of them owned by municipalities, that had the same international zoning code violation. So that was my intellectual property. Those 22 inspections were my intellectual property. I was using them as proofs to my argument that I was absolutely targeted. That Hillsdale Justice Project was targeted by people in people in elected positions and employees of municipalities, simply because who I am and what we do. So when that stuff was thrown out, it was no longer part of the public purview. However, Tom Thompson had copies of that. Tom Thompson took those copies and handed them over to Alan Beaker, the code enforcement. I get an email, or I'm sorry, not an email, but a text that said, "Hey, I don't know if I told you or not, but the city went after, it's going after all the buildings you complained about." Well, that was news to me because I hadn't made any complaints about any buildings in Hillsdale. What I had done is I had filed a court document uh, in my defense proving that I was being targeted. And that was still my intellectual property. And since it was thrown out of court, though my documents were thrown out of court, they weren't they weren't for public viewing. And so Thompson had no legal authority to take those and hand those over, my intellectual property, over to code enforcement. And now what they were going to try to do is they're going to try to go after all those other businesses and say that I was the one that was making the complaint on it. I wasn't making a complaint on any of the other businesses. I didn't want to see those people go through what I was going through. I was just using that as proof that I was being singled out. So when that happened, they actually, code enforcement, Alan Beaker, went to the annex building and filed code violations on the county for the code violations on the annex building. And oddly enough, they were all the ones that I pointed out, and some of them were pictures of exactly what I took pictures of and had my reports. So someone from the county gave me a copy of that code violation report from Alan Beaker, and I thought, okay, well, this is wrong. They're using my intellectual property. They're going after people, and I know what they're using it for. They're going to do it to try to sully my name even further and try to make people think that I'm some raving lunatic that's going out and going to grab a whole bunch of other people and make complaints on all these other people and have the city go after them. That wasn't that at all. I wasn't going after anybody. I wasn't making any complaints on anybody else's building. I was simply using those reports to show that I'd been targeted. And it's my intellectual property. It belonged to Rutan Management Incorporated. So I wrote a FOIA request. That FOIA request then I sent to Alan Beaker, wanting to know a couple different things. I wanted to know, number one, I wanted a copy of the complaint that I had made on those 22 different buildings. Number two, I wanted to know if they had done any code enforcement on any of those 22 properties that I had done the report on. And number three, I wanted a copy of anything that was sent, any of those properties, of those 22 properties that I had done an inspection on. Anything that was sent to those owners, I wanted a copy of it. So, under the FOIA law, Freedom of Information Act, I filed it with Alan Beaker because the law says I'm supposed to file that request with the office that's most likely to have that paperwork. Well, that would be Alan Beaker's office. So I filed it with him. David Mackey is the FOIA coordinator for the city of Hillsdale. And of course, he went over his 5 days. They went over their time. And so I'm trying to find out what's going on with my FOIA. I call them. They don't respond. They call me the next day and go, "Oh, well, your FOIA request is in the office. You can come pick it up." So I go to the FOIA office to pick it up. Of course, they had backdated it. And what it was a letter from David Mackey uh, that denied my FOIA request. And the reason why they denied it is because they said what I was asking for didn't exist. Well, that's odd because, see, I got their code violation from the county on one of the buildings that I did, and it was all the violations that I pointed out in my report, every one of them. Well, that was kind of odd that David Mackey's claiming that something doesn't exist that I'm physically in possession of. Well, that means that they lied. The FOIA is so that government is transparent. See, all that paperwork, everything that the government does belongs to we the people, not to them. It belongs to we the people. And it's supposed to be open to us so that there's full transparency in government, so that we can see what our elected officials, what our servants are doing, what our employees are doing, because we are the business owner, we the people, they're our employees. And if you're going to run an effective and a business, you have to see what your employees are doing. You have every right to know what your employees are doing. That's what the FOIA is there for. So he's denying me something that he says doesn't exist, and I am physically in possession of it. So, of course, I turn around and I file a lawsuit on the city because they're violating FOIA and they're not being transparent and they're not being um, good employees. And it goes before Sara Lizsnyia. Now, I'd used Sara as a lawyer one other time, and she horribly screwed the case up, and it is what it is. I just let it go. And for the past few years, Sara's threatened me quite a few times that I was going to get thrown in jail for operating as a lawyer without a license, mainly because of the Andy Feather case, because of the writ of habeas corpus I wrote that got him released from jail. Because they illegally targeted him, they lied, and he was an innocent man that they were absolutely destroying his life. So I guess that makes me a bad person to seek justice and try to help people that are caught in a system that's abusing them. So bad man for helping people. You don't help people. You know, the system is there to crush people, and anybody that gets in the way of trying to help people is a bad person. So this case goes before Sara Lizsnyia. Now comes the problem. My lawyer, the day they scheduled for the hearing, my lawyer couldn't be there that day. My lawyer had a hearing all the way up at the top of Michigan, and it was a jury trial, and so he couldn't be there that day. So a motion for adjournment for that particular day was put in, and of course you have to pay when you file your paperwork with Marney Kast's office. You file your paperwork, and once your paperwork's stamped and filed, then you pay your fee. Then they give you a receipt for filing that paperwork, and that receipt says what that paperwork was for. So that's exactly what we did. So we felt that the case had been rescheduled or adjourned for a different date. So after my lawyer had left town, and the original court date was supposed to be on a Friday, we see on Thursday that my case is on the court docket for Friday. So the lawyer's secretary calls Marty Kast's office and said, "Hey, that was supposed to be rescheduled. We filed a motion for that to be rescheduled. That's not supposed to be Friday." Well, we don't have the motion. What do you mean you don't have the motion? We've got a receipt that we paid for the motion. No, we never received a motion. Well, obviously you received a motion because we paid for a motion and the receipt says what the motion was. No, we don't have anything. Well, can we get it rescheduled? Nope, it's on the docket for Friday. It's on the docket for tomorrow. Well, the lawyer's not going to be here. Well, then your client's going to lose by default. Well, what do you think happened? It's exactly what happened. They held the hearing because my lawyer couldn't be there. I couldn't speak in my own defense. I had to have my lawyer. My lawyer wasn't there. We'd paid to have it rescheduled. So I lost by default. So I talked to my lawyer. I said, should we file a motion for readjudication? Well, we were pretty busy then. Things were going on. I said, well, why don't we just let them have that one? Okay, we'll just let them have that one. At least they know that, I'm not just going to lay down for things. So that was the biggest thing. We'll just let it go. It's not a big deal. I'm not seeking money. I'm not seeking any of that stuff. I just want them to stop uh, behaving badly. I just want them to know that we're watching, to stop behaving badly. Now, 3 weeks go by, and I get a summons to court because Tom Thompson and the city of Hillsdale suing me for frivolous lawsuit and suing my lawyer for sanction for bringing the frivolous lawsuit. Now, the chief argument was the reason why it was a frivolous lawsuit is because it was so frivolous, my lawyer didn't show up for court. Well, my lawyer didn't show up for court because obviously Marney Kast got rid of my paperwork in the county clerk's office, and we had proof of it. So we said, okay. Not only that, coupled with that, Tom Thompson, the city lawyer, never went to the council, got approval to do this. He just did it on his own. Isn't that odd? Him and Mr. Mackey. I thought we had an elected board at the city to make those decisions, but sadly not. So it goes to court. Sara Lizsnyia, the argument was, Tom Thompson said, well, Mr. Rutan never filed a FOIA. My lawyer said, Your Honor, yes, Exhibit A shows the FOIA that was put in. Mr. Thompson counters with, well, Mr. Rutan filed it with Mr. Beaker, and Mr. Mackey is the FOIA coordinator. So he didn't file it in the right place. So he didn't file a FOIA. Sara Lizsnyia goes, well, that's true. So I'm going to find that Mr. Rutan didn't file a FOIA. Didn't file a FOIA. He said, so she accepted that argument. And then she said, well, this should have been argued at the original trial. My lawyer said, Your Honor, we filed a motion to have it adjourned. And we've got the receipt, that's Exhibit B, that we did file. And for some reason, your office couldn't find the paperwork. She said, no, I'm going to, you never filed anything. She rejected that from her own office, from her own clerk of the court, rejected the receipt that we paid for the adjournment. So she filed against me and said that, yes, it was a frivolous lawsuit, charged me $1,540 for that. Okay. So now I can't trust the county clerk when I file paperwork. And so now we're embroiled in this huge lawsuit. So every time I filed a motion, everybody knows I wear a body cam everywhere I go. So I would record in the public space my public employees in them performing their public function, absolutely 100% within the First Amendment. So I do that one day, and I happen to be down to Indianapolis doing a radio interview, and I get called from the court bailiff, Officer O'Haron, and he informs me that Judge Lizsnyia saw my recording in the county clerk's office, and I had 5 days to take that recording down. And if I didn't take the recording down in 5 days, she was going to bring criminal indictment on me under Michigan Court Rule 8.115C. Okay, well, there's some things about 8.115C. I'm absolutely within a public space. I'm absolutely within my First Amendment right. But if you remember my last episode, I talk about that the staff in her office admitted openly to people that they didn't want to be precinct delegates. they didn't care to be precinct delegates. They were just holding that spot so that America First people couldn't hold those spots. Well, remember I told you in April what Marney did. That showed her intent to fix the precinct delegate election in 2022. And I also brought that out in the last episode of what their staff said. And I also brought out that if they wanted to keep pushing this thing, we'll depose their staff because under Title 18, 242, USC 242, to deprive somebody their civil right under the color of law, deprivation of rights under the color of law is a crime. Well, boy, as soon as that came out, Sara Lizsnyia puts out this thing, and there you can't record anywhere in the courthouse. You can't record here. You can't record there. You can't record just outside the courthouse. So it's my supposition that they're worried about who got caught on tape. They're worried about if they're going to push this thing further and it goes any further, that it's going to get outside the state and it's going to go to federal. And at that point in time, then we've got proofs to prove everything exactly of what we're saying, that there's been people targeted, that they've been using the court system to target people, that elected officials have been plotting and doing things that they shouldn't be doing, simply to be in power and stay in power. And that now comes down and implicates Judge Lizsnyia. So if you remember during the whole fairgrounds debacle, we filed a temporary restraining order, and Sara Lizsnyia intentionally spoiled that TRO. Well, I filed a judicial tenure complaint on that. That complaint, I got called on it yesterday, now has an investigator, and they're going to be investigating that, along with all these other proofs I'm going to be giving them. The other thing is, you have to remember the Judicial Tenure Commission investigates judges or judicial officers. Marney Kast is a judicial officer, and so is Neil Brady. He's a judicial officer as well. So there's going to be quite a few things that are going to come out. We do have audio and videotape and still pictures and witnesses that are willing to be deposed under oath. So we'll see where this thing goes. Because the other thing is with 8.115C, it does say that the judge can set that stuff up. However, in January 2020, they started easing up on those restrictions to cell phones and pictures and laptops and everything in a courtroom for not just court personnel, but for the layman too, as long as it's not disruptive to the court procedure. Because there's a lot of people that do their own cases anymore, and it's unfair that they don't have access to all of that stuff like the lawyers do and like the court staff does. Not only that, some courtrooms you're not even allowed to take your phone in, and if you used public transportation to get there, you can't take your phone back out to the parking lot and put it in a car that you don't have in the car. So they've restricted that. So isn't it odd how the Michigan Supreme Court has been lifting a lot of those restrictions, but now that the court and the court staff and the judicial officers are now embroiled and put themselves into this fight, isn't it odd how Sara Lizsnyia is now defending them by using her power as the chief magistrate to not take care of justice? Under the judicial canons, the judges have an obligation to justice and to do the little things that they're doing with the positions of power that they've got violate those judicial canons. So, just wanted to kind of bring that issue out to everybody. Elections have consequences, and when they get to fix the elections, they get to fix the consequence, don't they? And isn't it odd how we never have anybody ever run for judge? When a judge gets elected or a prosecuting attorney gets elected, the unwritten rule in town is, oh, nobody run against them, not until they decide that they want to retire or step down. Well, that doesn't bring us competition, does it? Competition is the only thing that brings us the best of the best. So we don't have the best of the best. We have what we have, which is a steaming pile of people who don't understand ethics or justice. So think about that. Um, this has been episode 5 with the grumpy old vet. Have a good morning, have a good afternoon, have a good evening.